Hi Gerry, so I'm Kaylee, social worker. I'm really happy that you've come to see me through this virtual platform. I was really happy to meet you originally through Twitter because I'm really interested in your work around values, and obviously that's been what you've been known for in your career as well as a lot of other things, and you've got an MBE, which is exciting because I've never met someone with that, so I'd love for you to explain that to me as well. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. I'm just really pleased that you did like my video that I put out for social work students, because obviously you're a lecturer. And one of my visions really is that I'd like to see a sort of the academic side and the social workers coming together, because I feel like there's sometimes a bit of disconnect between the two. And I suppose that like part of my YouTube channel is that I want to bring them together. So I just feel really privileged that you've given me the opportunity to speak to you, because
Thank you.
And that you saw that. So that's great. So do you want to speak a bit about what you've done and about the MBE? I am eager to find a bit about that.
Okay, firstly, I'm very grateful for you reaching out and giving my work a platform through this. This is not something I've done very often. So that's just lovely. And I think you're a fresh, bright and encouraging voice in social work. And that's tremendous. I'm at the other end of my career. I've been in social work for 300 years now. So we've got to look at the people like yourself who are coming up and through, giving something back from people like myself. So thank you. The MBE, well, I'm living in Northern Ireland, and I spent a long time of my personal and professional life working in what we call the Troubles, which is curious euphemism, dealing with the conflict in Northern Ireland. And my role was essentially about peace building, peacemaking, conciliation, reconciliation. Amazingly, that was recognised by the British government in 2019. Feels really weird. So yes, there it was, and lovely day at Buckingham Palace, not a place I'm used to going or anything. And the work was recognised and the contribution I'd made in Northern Ireland, and also working with young people. So it was a double thing. Yeah, so it was lovely. But anyway, that's enough of the embarrassing. Now I'll do.
I know I put you on the spot there, but thank you. I just think it's really interesting. So you've not just done sort of social work and lecturing, you've been involved in like the political side, which sometimes people shy away from, don't they, as well?
Yeah. Well, I believe in politics with a big P and a small p. Part of the work at Treaty House, and the model that we'll talk about is named after that. Treaty House was about a place where I tried to bear witness to the possibilities of peace in a very divided community in my life and everything around me. And actually that was my home, because that's the most difficult place to be a loving person in the world, is your own home. And then to reach out from one's own home to connect with the community and not just moan and groan about things being difficult and awful and scary and threatening and violent, but doing something. And I suppose the thing that occurred to me was, well, so what am I going to do? So bought a house and set it up in an area, and from there I reached out, and that seems a long time ago. And if you're saying to me, would I do it all again? No. if I knew then what I knew later, I was thinking, no. I mean, I'm laughing, but it was very difficult, challenging and frightening, some of the work to be involved in. And also lots of people wouldn't have been aware of it, because I also had day jobs called being a social worker, being a social work academic and other things. But yes, I wear many hats, metaphorically anyway.
Yeah. So you've developed this model.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And I just wanted to talk to you a bit about why you think it's important, and then maybe we'll go ahead and go through it.
Okay, thank you. Well, one of my favorite words is miasma. And years ago, as I say, about 300 years ago, I was like yourself at one stage in your life, learning social work as an undergraduate, and words like values were used. I don't really remember words like ethics particularly, or principles, but values. And I always felt a wee bit confused about when people were talking about values. They tended to describe them or name them, and used to be multiple values. And when I certainly asked the question of the academics then, or practice teachers or supervisors, colleagues later, etc., I realized that, like the miasma, it was like this mist that you knew these things were in there, but they weren't very clear. So I increasingly became convinced that people were unclear about what is a value, what are values, could people articulate those clearly? And I've had many experiences in my life where people have been under pressure to try and articulate these, and clearly couldn't. In fact, often thought it was a rude question. So as somebody who was then teaching social workers to be, I thought, well, I need to be clear for me. And I started then on a journey, which must be about 30 years ago now, actually probably a bit more. Anyway, my asthma is my own head about my own lifetime. So I started working out, how would I teach this well? And then I realized, well, I need to talk about values and then principles and ethics. And the one interesting thing is, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, there's actually generally no disagreement around ethics. I would argue there's probably very little disagreement around principles. Values, that's the interesting bit, and we'll come back to that. Well, I suppose the take-home message for me is that there are only 5 values for people working in the helping professions, which we'll come back to. But then that wasn't enough, because I thought, well, okay, that's what we're expecting sort of students to learn, practitioners to put into their work, etc. But what lies underneath that? So anyway, slowly and surely I started putting this model together, and I've been teaching it and training people in it for years and years. Hopefully some of them might remember some of them. But the bottom line is, when you're a practitioner in any helping profession, and indeed other professions, I've worked outside of social work as well doing this, you bring you to the situation, and you've got to be able to see the person for who he or she is. And I think the model reminds me what's really important, especially when I'm under pressure. But the model works in multiple ways, not just in terms of what we're dealing with in terms of the drivers, but also applied to any social work scenario, life situation, etc., etc. So I've anticipated some of the questions that I think you will ask, some of the lovely challenges you've been posing me over the last couple of weeks and couple of months now, thinking about this with you. So hopefully I'll cover those. And why do I think it's important? If I don't know what's driving me, well, I'm at the mercy of lots of things. I'm at the mercy of external events, external triggers, etc., etc. So I've got to be anchored in my assumptions, my beliefs, values, principles, ethics, etc., which we'll talk about. And that grounds me. And I then translate that, hopefully, with the authenticity that we'll talk about as we go through and other things, in my practice, so that every care and service user and colleague and student and whoever know that I'm coming from that good place. That doesn't mean to say that they judge you positively, because I find most people don't challenge people about their values and principles and things. They challenge them about the things that are more, I think, easier, things that they can see. And I suppose one of the difficulties about all this is, when I started to put the model together, I realized that everything I was talking about actually can't be seen. And that was the challenge to me, because actually, I can talk about values for days, but you can't actually see them. We talk about principles, you can't see them. You can't see ethics, you can't see the assumptions. What you will see, and we'll come back to the model, is, well, how are these translated? Where do they become evident? And then what are we looking for? And I've also done this work with inspectors as well, when they're inspecting social work. I want to know, if I'm an inspector, what's motivating that particular practitioner, what's motivating the carer, what's motivating the service user. And I also, and this is a lament of mine, so forgive me if it annoys you or any of your audience, I absolutely object on every fibre of my being to the idea that values and principles are different for service users, carers, social workers, and we all have different ones. That's part of the miasma. I'm going to argue that the values are the same. It's just that we don't really know them. We're not able to articulate. And once we do, I challenge anybody to say, why on earth would that be different? What is different are beliefs, and that's absolutely fine. We can have different beliefs about loads of things.
Yeah.
I support a particular football team. You may not share that, but you know what? That's okay. But we'll never fall out about the values. Hopefully that's a helpful context.
Yeah, that is really helpful, because I think sometimes the role of a social worker doesn't feel as clear cut as other people that you might be in a room with. And I think sometimes just having a language of what defines you and why you're doing what you're doing is really helpful. So I suppose that's what draws me towards this as interesting. And I just feel that I'm so eager to learn more about it, because and understand what it is that you're going to explain. So
okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Take it away.
Okay. Are we staying on this slide? Is that okay?
Yeah. No, I'm going to move it now. Is that all right?
Okay.
I can take this out. Okay. So I take it
Yeah.
through. Okay. So thank you for, as I said earlier, that's the expression of gratitude. And Kayla, one of the things was sent to you earlier, just a wee bit earlier, and I didn't know this either, that today is apparently International Irish Dance Kaylee Day. So there you go. So and I'm not into Irish dance. I mean, I don't know anything about it, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. My wife was listening. She'd go, "What do you know about dancing?" But anyway, but there you go. So it's
I
your
think
day.
that's great. This is a good day. What a day to be talking.
We couldn't have planned this, but
I know.
there it is. So Kaylee's asked me to do is just talk a bit about the models. This is hopefully setting the scene a wee bit. And for people who find that I talk too fast or too slow, whatever, they'll be able to, I'll give you all of this material and it'll be through yourself. You can make it available to people as you choose. So I'm going to look at some of the core drivers. In terms of my life and all the things that I've done, etc., I have what Einstein called a holy curiosity. So that's also about what I do, why I do it, and I've loads of other things that I'm interested in as well. But this is at the core of who I am. Hopefully, the people listening to this and watching it will find it of interest, and I don't let you down. So there it is. That's my email address, and people want to follow it up, but they want the information that comes from you, and hopefully, you're happy with that. You'll be the custodian of this.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so then some of the questions I get, you've asked me, loads of people ask me, so what is a value? What's a principle? What's an ethic? Who says? And that's right. So I'm just another person saying, well, here's what I think. You don't have to believe it, but at least, engage with it and then see what you want to do. And where did this myth begin that we have apparently different personal and professional value positions? Now, it is mythical. I find it very frustrating. And lots of systems perpetuate that, and it's very akin to creating a them and us in terms of working with people. But anyway, you can challenge me with this later.
Okay.
A key take-home message, I think, is, and this is where I think people get confused, they get confused with what has value and what is a value. And I think most of the time people are saying that's a value, they're really saying that has value, and that's the confusion. But I'll go through and see, hopefully I don't add to the confusion. So now, you said I have to ask you some questions as we go through. So you have to be the audience, okay? So this is your gig. So you have to tell me now, what do you see? Now, generally you have to do it quickly, so I do this with audiences.
Oh, grass and sky.
Good, okay. And I want the audience to do this as well, so that's fine.
Illusion, I think.
Okay, good. What do you see?
Sky in a heart shape and an E at the bottom.
Okay.
Good. And a heart in there.
There you go.
The galaxy.
Very good. So this is really interesting. So I don't really want to spoil it for the audience, okay? But there are other things to see. So I'm really hoping that they look at that because they'll not see what you have seen. Some will see what you've seen because of what you've said.
Yeah.
So pick one of those four and I'll tell you what else is there.
The one that's good at the right-hand side.
Okay. So if you look at that, you seem good because it's black writing.
Yeah.
Okay. There, white writing has got evil in it.
Oh yeah. You don't do that. That's so weird, isn't it?
It is, but it's not weird because this is so. There's a lovely piece of reading in the book of the Talmud. It's a Jewish book of sacred scripture to people who are Jewish, and it says we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So if we had a lot more time to do this, and we don't, and that's fine because I've loads to say. It's nothing to do with Kaylee holding me back. Her audience. She's given me plenty of time for this. But really the test is, how do we see what we see? Because actually, if we have 5 people watching this or 5,000, everyone sees the same thing, but people will tell you they see things differently. They don't. We filter what we see. So when you look, your filters that you operate with, we all have these, are attracted to certain things and distracted from others. So your eyes were drawn immediately, and the one that we're talking about, to the black writing. And that's absolutely fine, but you missed the white. My eyes may have been drawn quickly to the right and not seeing the black.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, and it's the same with the others. But I'm hoping, as I say, I don't want to, you and I can have that conversation off mic, as they say, in your word of doing this. So what I'm playing with now is our filters. What do we see? How do we see it? How do we know it? How do we sense it? How do we feel it? It doesn't have to just be a sight thing. How do we hear things? And because we've got filters, we have the ability to maybe to listen if our, you know, our hearing is there, etc., etc. But lots of other things get in the way of our ability, like our capacity. So at the minute, I'm doing this from home. You're interviewing me. It's still reasonably relaxed. So hopefully, although it's been a long day for you, a long day for me in terms of our respective jobs, etc. So when we're tired, our capacity narrows. When we're completely relaxed, maybe on holiday, our capacity to take on loads more of information might be expanded. And often, just as a slight aside, people confuse ability with capacity. When you're completely exhausted, career, service use, etc., sometimes the social work assessment will be very harsh. Where in fact, if that person had a wee bit more to eat, a bit more rest or whatever, they actually could be doing all those other things, you know, but we don't always think about that. And I know I can hear students saying to me, you never remember that when I'm handling assignments and things. Yeah, I do, but we're here to prepare you for serving other people. Okay, so this is the model. And I know you'd seen a screenshot of this before, it was on Twitter before, etc., etc. I thought, okay, in the beginning, how do I work this out? And I have a story about in the baby's earliest experiences, which I'll not go into now, we'll not have enough time for that. But basically, I'm asking yourself and people to consider from the beginning, how does the baby, child, the adolescent, then the adult and the elder, how does he or she develop as we go through? So we start with some basic assumptions. And those basic assumptions may be life's good. I'm born to people who care for me. I can trust people, etc., etc. So people can have all of those, and I spend a lot of time maybe when I'm doing training to talk about all those assumptions. And we'll come. If I don't remember to come back, then please bring me back to it.
Okay, I'll make a note.
So then we move to beliefs. Now remember, they're children, so start believing things. I need to take this as a spoiler alert. I may say certain things that concern people. For instance, and hopefully this is after the watershed for people listening to this, I might believe in Santa. I might believe in the Tooth Fairy. I might believe in angels. I might believe that Leeds United are the best football team in the world. I'm entitled to believe what I want. Now, remember, children we're talking about, okay? Some of those beliefs may not be true. I'm not saying which one of those they may be. Some of them may be true, but that's the thing about, a belief. It's something that generally can't often be proven, but that's what we believe in. I often say to people, what's the opposite of doubt? And I'll just leave that there. What's the opposite of doubt? Okay, so we have those assumptions.
Is it certainty?
Is it what?
Certainty.
Yeah, there you go. Because
I thought I'd jump in.
Yeah, okay. And we can't be certain. I mean, so that's why we believe. If it's certainty, then it's not a belief. I don't need to believe you're in front of me. Well, you know, sort of like online, as it were. I mean, you're there. You're there. Okay, so we've got our basic assumptions and beliefs. Now, as you look at the screen to the left, there's morals. And I like to highlight morals because morality is almost like a dirty word in society and social work and that. In fact, when was the last time you heard anybody in maybe teaching social work talking about the word morality? I find it's a clean word, it's a decent word, it's fine. And we develop our morality. And morality, in essence, is about what's right and what's wrong. So every child learns this. I'm not saying we all obey it, but we learn what that is. So these start feeding the values. Then they feed the principles, and then the ethics. And all of this feeds into the attitudes that we have about people, about situations, etc., etc. But all of this generally is still within. And then the big bit is, and what comes next? So how do we see all this in action? And of course, the word that's missing, and I'm hoping the audience are stretching for this now, what is the missing word? And of course, it's our behaviour.
Yeah.
Because that's what we judge in life. Now, that's not enough, but most social work assessments are about people's behaviour. You may have people sort of trying to work out what's underlying the behaviour, but bottom line is social workers are interested in saying, well, what do you do? What did you do with all that we give you? We will be measuring. Our behaviour isn't everything. We're not just our behaviour. But I understand when it comes to assessments that that's the most obvious thing people see, feel, sense, or whatever it is. So, and this, as I say, model is, so that's for the child, grows up, and I'll come back to some of this later on. But in essence, if you're leaving this now, what does this matter? Well, if I'm still operating as a certain age and stage of my life in the basic assumptions I made as a child, then there's a problem here. Because if those assumptions were not well informed, if they're not good enough, then I am not as clear in terms of my practice, I'm not as clear in terms of my sense of who I am, etc., etc. If I'm still believing in certain things, I'll leave those unnamed and still believe that, you know, certain things operate, etc., etc. Well, that may be a problem because I've not really matured my assumptions. I've not matured my beliefs. And you might say that's my choice, and that's true, but I'm meant to be operating with other people and helping and supporting them think about this. This also works with carers and service users because when we were children, we thought we did certain things, and you know, that was fine. We were children. As adolescents, we develop hopefully some of these things. We're going to change and mature into other ways of practice, hopefully. As adults, we're supposed to be more balanced about this, that these things are thought through and they're felt through and they're open to scrutiny. And hopefully all of that makes sense. My experience is when it comes to a lot of this is that people are not open to scrutiny. They're not open to challenge. A lot of this stuff is deeply defended, highly prized, and dealt with in rather superficial lines like, well, do you know, Kaylee, your values are different from mine, and we'll not fall out about it, or, you know, my values are different from the service user I'm working with, or the carer, you know, and I always say in those, well, give us an example of what you mean. And I'm going to now say, from my position in life with, you know, all these 300 years of experience, which may not mean anything, when people say values, they're invariably talking about beliefs.
Yeah. So
when I say to them, give me an example of what you mean that was different to the service user, they might say something about, you know, culturally, well, so what's the value? And they look at me as if I'm not wise, and that's okay. Sometimes I'm not. But really, I said, sure, that's a belief position that you've got. For a reasonable, but that's a belief. Right. And Kaylee, we'll come back to look at some. I've got a quiz at the end of this for you with all the words, some of which you've used for the last couple of weeks with me. Go, well, what's this and what's that? So with your permission, you can remove it if you don't like it. It'll be the test for everybody else who watches your program. Because you and I had fun with this a couple of weeks ago. So that's the model. And what I want to do now is just talk a wee bit about all these things and what they are. And just to say, this is not meant to be hierarchical. So some of these may be repositioned, etc. I just like the idea of a pyramid. Einstein said, make things simple, but not one bit simpler. I find that people seem to understand that if you do something from left to right, they tend to think it's all sequential, etc., etc. I have other slides where I flip the triangle and put it on its side, etc., etc. So it's just about simplicity, hopefully. And I think if I'm doing my job right, intuitively this speaks to people's experiences. Okay, now, but where did all this stuff come from? Well, your family. So if you're fortunate enough to grow up in a family situation. Now, all of us do it just may be a variation on that. So it might be sort of like your biological family, it could be a foster family, kinship, adoptive family, whatever it is. But your family, however you understand that term, will have influenced you. Your religious upbringing, if you've had one, will have some sort of bearing. Your peers, youth club, if you went to, media, particularly now in the 21st century, although I always think we have to be careful about demonizing media. If it wasn't for media, Kaylee wouldn't be interviewing me now, and it wouldn't be lovely to be on the platform with us, couldn't be possible. Education, culture, status, class, all of these things surround a child. There's more, much more. You can put those in from sociological perspective, etc., etc., and look at that. But all of those have had an impact on who Gerry is, who Kaylee is, who anybody listening to this is. And we rarely revisit this, but it comes out in moments of stress and pressure, which we'll come back to. And all of this, and hopefully that worked for Kaylee. Did it work?
Yeah.
Kaylee, did that work? Sorry.
I just wanted to ask you a question. So
yeah.
all of that, does that fit into every bit of the triangle? Or
It informs, but there's more. Okay, so that's just the child, yeah. So then you have the person stroke worker. So you're both of those now.
yeah,
So you'll have the legislation that informs what you do and what you don't.
yeah,
Policy, procedures, the customs of being a social worker and what's expected. Customs associated with being a female, being a male. Customs associated maybe with your Christian tradition, your Jewish tradition, your atheistic tradition, whatever that is. Practice, context will make a big difference. You're a social worker today, but you might be shopping in a major retail chain. You're not a social worker in there, so context matters. Gender, I've said, the environment, your age, experiences, expectations, all of these things influence what I've just said, okay? And other factors then that inform us, and particularly I'm talking to the social work audience, and other people who work in the helping professions. So human rights abuse is one of the big impacts of that, was to remind us we needed to be working through a prism of human rights, the Human Rights Act, etc., etc. Societal expectations, like what does society expect of social workers? And the answer is a lot. I just want to do a slight aside. There is a myth that most people in society don't think well of social workers, and therefore social workers should never say, or generally are discouraged from saying, or stop themselves saying in a social setting, I'm a social worker, because they fear the reaction. I think that's mythical, and generally I think it's social workers who perpetuate that myth. My experience is that most people understand social work's a tough job, very, very difficult. And when people are negative about it, it tends to be associated with the removal of children. It's family and childcare. I've yet to hear anybody ever say, oh my goodness, there's a social worker for fostering coming. They're generally grateful to see people come to talk about or adoption. So, well, thank you, Kaylee. We just have got to name some of these things and hit them on the head. There's so many people saying it, and I tend to say, well, you're a social worker saying it, or a social work leader saying it. Why are you saying that? That's not, around. And I saw something actually coming out today. I think it was on Twitter. It may have been Mark Harvey who sent that. So shout out to Mark, saying there is recent sort of research saying that maybe the public don't think as negatively about social workers as people might think. Okay. Government inclination, well, my goodness, look where we are now. But anyway, we're not getting into Brexit, post-Brexit, and all the rest of it, or how many should be gathering to meet with each other, and et cetera, et cetera. But the government inclination will have impacts in all of us in terms of things that we think about, et cetera. And I'll be returning to this. Litigation. So far too many professionals are now concerned with covering their back as opposed to doing the right thing. Now, I know this. The best helpers in this world, they go the extra mile and they get their face slapped, metaphorically. I know that, but go the extra mile. Yeah. You've got to do the right thing, and you've got to do the thing right. That's not the same thing. Leadership. I work in leadership, and I often start with an audience saying, hands up who the leaders are. You're lucky if you've got 2 people out of 100 put their hands up. And I doubt about your leadership. Think the next time you're gossiping. Leadership comes in many forms. And fellowship. And I know that's a Gerry Skelton word before anybody sort of like complains to Kaylee and says, that's no such word. It is, because I created it about 20 years ago, fellowship, and I like it. Professionalism, what is it to be professional? I used to say, look, people can give you a reputation and take it away from you. There's not a lot you can do. But when social work became a protected title, that had to be sort of like held as something that's really important, and we've got regulation around that, General Social Care Council, Social Care Council in Northern Ireland, etc., all of which is right. But professionalism is not about just maintaining such a distance that we just look after ourselves and are self-serving. The role of a professional is to profess. That's where that word comes from. Profess. That's why the values are important and the principles. We should be able to profess those. So when Kylie says to me, Gerry, what are your values? What are your principles? Which I'll come to. And she's done this, by the way, for anybody who doubts it. It wasn't just in a PowerPoint. Off the top of my head, I had to tell her. And she put me under lots of pressure. Yeah, she's a hard interviewer. But we need to be able to articulate those.
Yeah.
And our vocation comes from the ability to profess. International requirements, human rights would be a classic example of that. Licensing, regulatory obligations. You can't practice to be a social worker if you haven't got the, green light from the care council or whatever it is in terms of different jurisdictions. You have to be able to practice your license to do it, and that can be removed, of course. Social trends, media is one of them. Digital media is a big opportunity as well as threat for social services in terms of how things go. Inquiries, I have to say it pains my personal and professional heart when I hear yet another inquiry. And it pains me to say it, but I mean, how many times do we have to learn the same lessons? Very, very difficult. And these are the drivers, because sometimes we go down certain roads because of these drivers that were not right, and we need people to be leading and saying it. Okay, a lot of things are potentially complementary or conflicting. So you've got your own values. Kaylee has her own values, her own principles, her own ethics, her professional standing. She doesn't want to annoy too many people, but sometimes she might have to, and I know what that's like as well. Our own standards. Against that, you'll have things like, well, General Social Care Council might have standards. Social Care Council here in Northern Ireland, where I'm talking from, they've got their standards. I've got to meet those. Tomorrow they might be ringing me if they see this and go, Gerry, you're in trouble. I'm sorry. But chief social worker, who knows? Time pressures. I mean, lots of the best things in life get lost in time. I was going to say, when was the last time anybody said to Kaylee or anybody listening or watching this, oh, I'm sorry I didn't get back, busyness. Time was against me or whatever.
Yeah.
You're also a busy person. Let's not use time as an excuse. The bottom line is, you can't control time. Time is not relative. We are relative. Legal considerations, diminishing public confidence. Now, that's not about social work per se. That's about authority, about what the role of experts are and how experts, in lots of domains of life end up abusing trust in multiple ways and hurting, damaging people, etc., etc. So there is that sense of no longer are people in authority just given that status because they're in authority, and that's right. And I believe a sort of a movement that's developed in a positive way around that has been a meaningful involvement of carers and service users, which somebody like me has been doing when I was a social worker, and I've been in education for a long time. That's not new to me, working with people, etc. And maybe Kaylee and I talk about that another time. Maybe I know she's got other ideas for some of these. And then prior experiences, all of which has informed who I am, who Kaylee is, and everybody watching this in relation to that. So bear the model in mind. This is what I expect the best person and practitioners to have. And Kaylee, you can pick me up in any of these if you want, of course. A well-informed assumptive base. So I want to start with the idea that I was taught, and I wasn't bright enough or articulate enough to resist this. So I knew something wasn't intuitively right, but as I said, it wasn't intelligent enough to be able to argue with the person. It took me a while to work it out. Yeah. You should never make assumptions. Now that is ridiculous. So let's just get rid of that now. You have to be able to make assumptions or your brain will go into overdrive. What you do is try and make sure they're well informed and test the assumptions. So my opening assumption with Kaylee and doing this was, I will trust her and then test what she's doing. I said to her, test me first before you trust me. And we've got to work on those things in terms of that. So her well-informed assumptive base was, who is Gerry? Check him out, find out, oh my goodness, he's doing all this stuff here. I'm going to get an interview him. It's just lovely. But we had to start off with certain things that were important, their assumptions. A well-informed belief base. What do I believe about? Do I believe carers and service users matter? Do I remember that basically they're paying my wages in terms of as an educator and social work, as a social work practitioner, trainer, manager, director, whatever? Well-developed instincts. Now that's something, there's no substitute for practice in that. But remember, before you get into social work practice, you had lived in life. So if hopefully they're developed rather than basic, back to the basic assumptions. If your instincts are just basic, then very little is going to frighten you very quickly. So we've got to be resilient around that. And that's another good thing for an interview. What is resilience? But we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Well-informed value, principle, and ethical base. I've got some things that I'll come back to. Considered attitudinal disposition. So it doesn't matter how you're thinking and feeling. When you're serving people, put your best face on. Tune in to what's going on for you and then tune it out. Okay, you're not a machine, but you're not getting in there asking carers and service users to do the heavy lifting for you. Your job is to serve them. Now, slavery is outlawed. I know it still goes on, but it's outlawed. You're not a slave, but you're a public servant. And I often wonder why public servants get annoyed with that. That's my job as well, to serve people. It's the profession I've chosen. Well-informed knowledge base, including legislation, theory, anti-oppressive practice, evidence-based practice, practice-based evidence, etc. Knowledge and understanding, another myth. Knowledge is power. Get rid of that. Now, years ago, I used to have to try and argue that. Now it's called the internet. It's full of knowledge. Nobody understands it. Lots of people quote those things to you and they don't know. It's he or she who understands the knowledge has the power. They're in the better position. Knowledge itself is not power. Ability to move beyond description, become more analytical. I've got it in twice now. I'll have to correct that. I beg your pardon. It should say analytical, evaluative, and reflective.
Okay.
Theoretical application in terms of we've got to understand theory. It shouldn't be taught up here like it's in the ether. It should be right here. And a question I posed to Kaylee a couple of conversations ago was around theory. Give me anything you're doing in life and I'll tell you how it relates to your theory. So I might come back to that another time. She's still doing her homework, would you? A range of skills. And I'm doing this because a lot of people talk about these things like they're all values. To begin first from legislative policy and procedural requirements, you can't practice social work without that. Your core responsibilities, self-management. We've got to manage ourselves. Now, I distinguish between self-coping and self-managing. Coping, if I'm bereaved, I have to cope with that for a while. I'll not be managing it. I'll be broken-hearted, etc., etc. But there comes a time where I've got to manage myself. And back to the model again, if you can just bear that in mind when I'm talking. If my basic assumptions about myself are I'm not good enough, if I believe I'm not good enough, if I believe the world's an awful place and awful things are going to happen, well, you can see how self-perpetuating this becomes.
Yeah.
An ability to critique theory, practice, self, Gerry Skelton, Kaylee, social work, social care, healthcare, medical model, social model, critique these. That doesn't mean to say you throw them out. You don't throw baby out with the bathwater, etc., etc. But you're able to critique them. You know what's good about something, what's less good, what's not good, etc., etc. And then if there were other ideas around that, which Kaylee might want to come back to in talking. Right, so this is what I'm always challenged in with Gerry. Okay, what are the values? And I say, with a humble heart, ladies and gentlemen of this audience, there are only 5. Respect and acceptance, that's 1 and 2. They're the only 2 I put in numerically. 1 and 2. Respect is based on one thing. You are a human being. And every child comes into you. Try and remember when you were going to school. What were you thinking and feeling when you first walked in, if you could remember this? You want everybody to accept you. We're often frightened of rejection and we seek approval. And unfortunately, lots of that gets confused for people. The other 3 are honesty, truth, and trust. I say to people all the time, if you don't agree with them, that's fine. Give me your top 5 and see how you can dislodge those. I don't put them up there to anybody's head. It's taken me years of refining this to get that into that. And I know when Kaylee and I have been doing this, then she's got other things. And I thought, so I'll come to that in a minute. So there they are: respect, acceptance, trust, truth, and honesty, truth, trust, and honesty, honesty, truth, and trust. I'm not reading them, I'm just looking at the camera. You can play those any which way you like, but 1 is respect, number 2 is acceptance. They're fundamental. And Kelly, you can pick me up with this when you come back. I've got a couple of other bits, a couple of humorous lines as well as some other stuff. I like the Groucho Marx ones. These are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others. Maybe before your time as well, the Marx brothers. But anyway, somebody called Gerry Skelton, GS. Principles are an extension and elaboration of values, and I absolutely believe that. So the 5 core values, they feed into the principles. So I'm not expecting everybody to read that. They can do it in their own time. Kaylee, you and I can. These are the principles. Not exclusive. There's more, but in terms of that. But the first, and it's the only one gets numerical value here, is integrity, because it encapsulates the 5 values, but they feed integrity. And what is integrity? For me, integrity is doing the right thing, whether anybody's looking or not. You're not doing it just for the round of applause. You're doing it because it's right. That's what integrity is. Nobody can take your integrity away except yourself. Don't sell it.
Powerful statement.
Oh, well, thank you.
I liked that bit. Yeah.
Well, now don't embarrass me. Let me get to the end of it.
Sorry.
Okay, you're all right. So authenticity, diversity. I mean, you can read all of those, talking to everybody as well as excuse me, Kaylee, in relation to this. So people can pick those, etc., etc. I don't think any is any better than anywhere else, etc. Justice also comes into ethics. So some of them are not just cleanly delineated like that, but just for simplicity. Also, why do I do it like this? Because I'm hoping by the end of this that people can be clear about when they're saying a value. Well, that's a value. I know a principle. Now, we'll come to look at what's the difference between values, principles, qualities, skills. We'll do all that as well if we get some time.
I have to say, I definitely thought anti-oppressive practice was a value. I think it's because you read it in the values book.
Exactly. Well, you know what? That's true. And you know, the answer is even in it because it's practice.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But when you look at anti-oppressive, what's it based on? It's based on the value of respect. It then opens up into this anti-oppressive, non-judgmentalism, non-condemnation. But the core is respect. Often people say to me confidentiality, and I go, confidentiality is about, and I quote, respecting the confidence. That's what that is. I mean, the answer is actually in it. You know, it's even in the definition. And then people go, sure, that's right. I hadn't really worked that out. It's just I spent a lot of time thinking about this, talking about it, etc., etc. So there's the list. And ethics, there's no dispute. Nobody actually has anything. We all agree. We basically nicked these from the medical profession and all the rest of it. But just want to say we, I mean, Kaylee. So short. I mean, it's not, these are things that have been around since, you know, time really. Hippocrates with the, you know, oath, etc., etc. Beneficence, non-malfeasance, autonomy, voluntary consent, informed consent, confidentiality, anonymity, justice, and in particular, like Beth Humphrey, so big shout out to her, argues that this is often overlooked and so short, and I have to say there is some truth in it. So what does all this then matter in terms of how do we improve service to myself, to agencies, the people I'm working with and others, etc., etc.? Well, the values are, I'm going to be respecting people when I'm working with them. I'm going to be accepting them. Now, I don't have to accept the behaviour. I'll separate the person and the behaviour. If the behaviour is appalling, we can condemn the behaviour, but we've got to find a way of relating to the person and helping him and her deal with that, etc., etc. Every service user and carer knows what you think of them within the first couple of seconds of meeting you. If you are condemning of them, you can't hide that. You may think you can, but they know. Kaylee has, in her experience in life, met people. She hasn't told me this, but I know this because I have. Everybody listening to this knows. You've met people and you know really what they think of you and they're pretending otherwise. So we've got to tune in and we're not bringing our judgments in, not bringing our condemnation, to people. However, another myth I want to blow now, I should have called this Mythbusters, maybe, who knows? There may not be Mythbusters, you might disagree, well, that's fine. The idea that social workers do not make judgments is absurd. Yeah. It's part of their job. It's their raison d'etre to make judgments. What they're not there to do is to be condemning people. They've got to judge, are you looking after your child in a reasonable manner? Are you caring for your elder? Don't like the phrase old people, all the rest of it. We're all older since we started this. So let's have more affirming terms for our elders. So are you caring properly? Are you providing the right sort of support, etc., etc.? They're the sort of things that we need to be thinking about. Values there, etc., etc. So I said earlier about the child, every adolescent, every adult, every elder wants to feel and to believe and to think that they're accepted. They don't want to be condemned by you. So I argue that generally most people in life are seeking approval. And what we call it is respect, which is a really curious thing. So Kaylee and I were doing this the other day. I think, you know, I might say I respect you, Kaylee, because of the good work that you're doing, and I do. But if she wasn't doing good work, or I disagree with it, I might say, well, you know what, I have no respect for that woman doing that work. You know, some of you might think that about me as well. There it is. But you know what? I don't need to earn your respect, nor does she. We're entitled to it, and so are you, because you're a human being. Everything other than that is about your judgment. you approve or you disapprove. That's your choice.
So that would that come back to what you said before about you have value?
Yeah.
So the distinction between that and your values.
Absolutely. So what people value when it comes to that, I think there's actually a misunderstanding of the word respect. Mm-hmm. Respect is about having regard for and maybe conferring that on someone, but we conflate it with our judgment. So I might say to people, you know, if you support Leeds United, I respect you. If you support another team, I don't. Really what I'm saying is that I am judging your choices. Yeah. Well, that's not respect. You can choose to support any football team or no football team, any sport. That's entirely reasonable. You're a human being. You're worthy of my respect. You don't have to earn it. And I'm sorry we've spent too many generations generations upon generations teaching this. I'll come back to this. I've got a wee bit to say about respect. I'll come back. I'm getting ahead of myself. And then how does this translate then in terms of the principles? Well, work in a partnership with service user, carers, other agencies in dignifying these role principles, empowering equitable ways. We can add loads of words to that. They're all on the list. Ethical considerations. Let's do some good. Thanks very much. Let's not do any harm. Now, that's always a difficult one in social work. I mean, if you're moving someone into care or against their will in terms of sectioning in the England, Wales experience, etc., they may not think you're doing any good in that moment. So that's always, different perspectives on that. But hopefully the social worker is acting with integrity in relation to that. With a duty of care, there's a guy called Gerry Skelton says, and a duty to care. Could we please bring that in? I find it very frustrating that there are people working in the helping services don't seem to care. So they might say sort of have a duty of care. And I go, I know, but could you please just care as well? Yeah, then a duty of candor, etc. And I'm sorry, Skelton talks about is joining the operational, strategic and relationship dots. That's what makes the best social workers, the best helpers in relation to that. So why do we need to consider any of this? That's what sort of Katie wants me to think about as well, and I've been talking about for years. Well, the current sector is not a neutral environment, or it's not neutral activity. Personal, collective, organizational attitudes, beliefs, values, principles, ethics, etc., they're always present. They should be sort of like at the forefront when people come in, and you often hear this. One challenge would be for the listeners and viewers of this, maybe to start looking at the social work, start there, or National Health Service, and whatever it is you want to, all the agencies that work with people, do a quick search on what their values are, and you're going to get a bit of a surprise. Now, because they're all different. More recently, there's been an attempt to standardize those into 4 or 5, but they're not, in my view, all of them values. I'm sorry, I have to say it, they're not. Now, I'm talking about the helping sector in relation to that. I mean, if I was working just in a pure business model, I'd have other ideas about this. But we're talking about the helping profession, service, serve, look after people. Service users will have their own assumptions, beliefs, etc., which may clash with yours in the organizations. Note, I didn't say values or principles or ethics even. They don't generally clash. I mean, service users know what it is to be respected and want respect and acceptance and trust and truth and that. Now, I often hear social workers, not just social workers, professionals say, what do they do if they lie? I mean, is that not a contradiction? I'd say, well, and you don't? Yeah, pregnant pause.
Yeah, I think that is something that a lot of people say. It's something people struggle with, definitely.
On occasions, your assumptions and beliefs may conflict with your agency, organisation, the person supervising you. So we have these, and some of these conflicts are healthy. I have no issue with that, but don't call them values. They're not value conflicts.
Yeah.
Okay. Society might be in conflict with all of these. Might say, well, I'm not quite sure what those social workers working with people who are homeless are doing, wanting to sort of work in this area. We'd rather blah, 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 blah. It's essential that all of us operate from a well-informed, as I said, attitude, beliefs, values, principles, and ethical base to protect others. And that's why we should be scrutinized, and that's why we are. But if we're not clear on what these are, how do we scrutinize them? The other stuff I've said, so I just want to push on. So when entering into this discussion, this is I'm anticipating what some of Kaylee's going to be asking me. So around this, well, let's think about, well, how do my assumptions, the beliefs, the values, principles that come into being? Hopefully the model helps you track that a bit. And it really is in terms of reflection, self-reflection, team reflection. And this can be done collectively. It doesn't have to be just on your own. But you've got to look at yourself, know thyself, and take responsibility for who you are. And that's about what's contributed to you being who you are at this moment in your life. And there's a whole sort of like story behind you, whether it's his story or her story. Remember history, it's his story. I like that. Anyway, who or what do I model him on? So hopefully some people immediately come to mind in all your heads and hearts watching this, people that you have valued. It may have been, people probably in authority in your life, positions of status, parent, grandparent, teacher, whatever that is. Hopefully not pop stars or whatever often people shout out, but people that, and it may not always been at the moments in your life that they thought you loved or liked them and all the rest. It may have annoyed your head, but they modeled important things. And I found as I've, grown older, etc., I realized the arrogance of my youthfulness, not understanding. My grandfather, when I was very, very young, said to me, "What is the biggest word in the dictionary?" Now, I was very young. I was trying to think strawberry or something that had lots of letters in it. And he said, "If." And I thought, I haven't got a very bright grandfather. I have to say, I remember those words very humbly for so many years now. How many people say, "If only"? I say, my goodness, that's a big caveat, isn't it? Those two letters. Do you mind other people's assumptions, belief, values, principles, ethics remain static or evolve? Now, another myth is that your values will always change. That's nonsensical to me. It makes no sense. Respect doesn't change. Acceptance doesn't change. Trust, truth, honesty don't change. You may not apply them properly, correctly, consistently, but they don't change. Is one greater than another? It's up to you to decide. You may disagree with Skelton, say, "I don't think respect's number one." That's up to you. How do I decide? I decided for me. I've read so many books in all of this. In fact, there's loads of books that have the words values, principles, and ethics in it, but none of them have that in the title. None of them. They may call them ethical values, principle ethics, ethical principles. Does my head in. But anyway, and how do we reach agreement? But you know what, you decide for you and then start testing it and being transparent around it. What puts pressures on my assumptions, beliefs, values, etc. to change? I mean, academia you might have things like, how do your personal and professional values differ, etc. And I'm saying, sorry, they don't. They never have. It's mythical that they differ. So think about that for yourself, practitioners. I often hear people, I've been training people in this for years and years, and they say to me, "But I keep my own values, Gerry," and I'm thinking, okay, and I know they're deeply defended and prized now. And I went, well, if they're my own, that's a real emphasis, isn't it? Tautology, I think that is. So I said, what are they? And invariably, they're not values or beliefs. Yeah. For example, one conversation I had recently, somebody said, well, my values would be different. So, and I said, what are they? And they said, well, I come from a Christian perspective. And I said, well, that's absolutely fine, but this is belief now, not values. Now, it's okay. You can talk about Christian values now, but how would Christian value, an Islamic value, a Jewish value, Hindu value of respect not be common to all of them? In fact, they are common to all religions and outside of that. How do I react to those with different assumptions, beliefs? Generally, we can be superior and thinking we know best. Social workers are agents of the state, no matter what way you look at it, etc. So we have to be careful about that. There is a mythical thing that carers and service users and social workers are sort of level. They're not. No, social workers are very powerful, and I think that's a good thing. You take the power and you use it to serve others. Do not deny your power or your authority. Use it wisely. And sometimes that's about difficult conversations and making very difficult decisions and intervening when other people think you're interfering. So it's a complex job. And how do I say what's a good assumption, belief, value, principle? Hopefully I've helped with that. You don't have to listen to me. How can I challenge inappropriate assumptions that people have, including in your teams? I mean, you will hear stuff as social workers that people are saying, and you think, oh, they were talking about me like that. What would I be thinking and feeling? Because there's very much we're very quick to distance people, all of them, with labels. And there's a phrase I introduced a couple of years ago called labelization. It's about just that sort of like distancing. Before you know it, we talk to the label, not the person. Family and childcare, we might talk about lack, and you're thinking, my goodness, that's a looked after child. Or, you know, I was working with NEETs recently and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, not an education training employer. Like, how could we refer to people like this? And people go, well, it's shorthand, you know, I wouldn't say it to them, no, to them. You know, anyway, I better watch or I might get slapped. Gerard Sorrow, a French philosopher, and somebody called Skelton. If a person believes something is real, it's real in its consequences. If my assumptions about people are that they are, you know, if I'm negative about that, well, I'm going to find the evidence that supports that. If I try and be positive and realize I'm there to serve, not be served, well, I'm going to find the evidence. Now, that's not to say that social workers should always be so optimistic or overly optimistic or pessimistic. It's about a balanced approach. And in a balanced approach, you can make a balanced assessment, a balanced intervention, etc. Skelton says what we believe with conviction. So it's not just intellectual, it's connecting the emotion becomes our truth. Everyone listening to me, back where I started with Kaylee, will be listening with filters. You will hear me and hear Kaylee in a certain way, see us in a certain way. That's not just because of who we are, that's also about how you look at us. So you've got to work, because inside your head, that's your truth. Now the good news is, if you share that, you know, it's reasonable just to test it now again. But most of us don't really share too much what's going on in our heads. Why? Back to the model. Because we're afraid of the basic assumptions people have made about us already. We're afraid of the beliefs they have about us. We're afraid that the number one value will not be evident, that we will not be respected. They might use words of liberation like, I'm here to help and all the rest of whatever you say, don't be worried, I'm not going to judge you. That's not true. Of course you're going to judge them. So you've got to find ways of working that to do your job, but enable people to be people and tell you some of the difficult things. And then behaviour, as I said earlier, ultimately that's what people inspect, assess, judge, appreciate, critique, etc. And here's one good thing. Kaylee, don't be doing this, but you can try it. You can try it. Try and give yourself a compliment, or try and offer a compliment to another person that's got nothing to do with what they do for you. It's a compliment about them. It's actually very challenging. I famously said to my mother regularly, until I had to challenge myself, Mum, I love your cooking, I love your cooking. She says, you're always saying that to me. The hidden message was, Mum, don't stop cooking.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying.
Yeah, it like, they're not serving you. It's like thinking of something that's just,
It's about them, not about you, not about what you get from, just about them. It's actually very hard. Now, even harder is to compliment yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not, so I've got some stuff there about respect, so I'm just you know, so I'm going to leave that on, just about some of it I've covered and just racing through now. This is a bit I was saying earlier, I'll come back to. Most of us have been predicated in these parental mantras, you know, respect your elders, or, you have to gain earn respect, respect people in authority. Every child is taught to look up, not look in. And that's always been an issue for me, trying to work particularly with young people, and helping them find their self-belief, their self-confidence. Now, a lot of them have too much self-belief and self-confidence, so we're getting that balance really, etc., etc. But we've got to teach children from the earliest point that we can to look in, to respect themselves, and from that position, I believe fundamentally they will respect other people. I mean, and this is not for, try and make sure audio is off, Kaylee, and the whole audience, whoever will be listening to this at some stage. Try and think of the affectionate put downs that were used in your family as you were growing up. The things that were said to you that if you didn't smile or laugh, you'd just think about it. You know, I mean, one of the worst I ever heard was I was in a house and somebody who I knew well, you know, said to his wife, like, where is the wee rat today? You know, and I thought, what, the wee rat? And they said, oh, it's just our youngest, we call him the rat. I said, the rat? And they said, oh, he loves it. I mean, he is the rat. He's just a rat. You know, it's, or, you know, how often were we referred to as the rascal, or, you know, now when I was younger, my mother and father would have went out and, you know, I was sort of like playing in the street and that, and they would have said, you know, where is the love of our life? Your tea is ready. Not, I'm only joking. They never said any of that. Somehow or other, not everybody, we're more informed now, but somehow or other people still think it's okay to be putting children down.
Yeah.
Now those children start doing that to everybody around them, and then they become adults, and a lot of that behaviour continues in terms of that attitude, etc., etc. And we dress it up humorously. But I just say, you know, for any relationships you're in, trying the next time to say it without smiling, or when you hear it, actually don't collude with it. Just go,
Yeah.
so what does that mean? I call it affectionate put downs. They're put downs.
Yeah.
People mean it affectionately. They're put downs.
And I think
So,
it is important to recognise that, because it does have a massive impact.
totally. And back to the model again. Well, if they're the things you're hearing early days, and we're teaching children to look up, well, one of the things we like quickly as people, we like power. Now, people are either wanting power, taking power, giving their power away, but power is a big part of our relationships in lots of ways, positively and negatively, etc., etc. But what we need is children to grow up with a sense of their own power and to use that responsibly. And if we have people doing that, and I mean, I don't want to get into overly political in this discussion, but some of those children have grown up into adults who have a lot of power in the world now, and you know, it's hard not to look at the children who are in those positions of power. But I'll leave that to whatever you think I mean, audience. So that's a wee bit of what I was saying. I'm leaving that on so people can have this material. Often we feel particularly with respect, we cannot respect what we don't understand. This is why, excuse me, ignorance from my point of view is the enemy. And that's why we need to find ways of dealing with intolerance, fear, discrimination, violence. For me, this is what feeds racism, sectarianism, sexism, ageism, disableism, all of those isms. One that nobody ever talks about, I just want to say as a tall person, is heightism. Just putting that out there. You never hear that mentioned.
No, it's definitely true though, isn't it? Like they do say a lot. Like if women are, they say if women are too tall, you'll never get a partner, or if men are too small, it's definitely something that...
Oh, definitely. But I bet you've never heard of that one until now, heightism.
No, I haven't. I didn't. Is that an actual thing?
It's a Gerry thing. But I'm very tall. And the other thing is, if you're quite tall, and people who are tall will know this, people have no issue about chatting and say, what height are you? Or making jokes about your height. Now, they're less inclined if you're the opposite, if you're rather small rather than tall, etc. I'm not saying that people are not rude about that, but it's an interesting thing about the freedom we think we can say to people who are tall. Anyway, so...
Well, what about me being ginger then? Could that be hairism?
It is.
Because well, not now because I'm more confident, but I got a lot of abuse to the colour of hair. So
even think about the word. Now, you raised this, I didn't. Okay. So I want to proceed gingerly.
Yeah.
Because, and that's again based on a prejudice.
Yeah.
Somehow or other, people who have ginger hair, etc., are fragile.
Oh, right.
And you probably have heard that as well. Oh, red hair, ginger hair, hot-tempered, and you're thinking, my goodness. Now, Kaylee, you should come from, I mean, I used to have blazing red hair, etc., etc., and I came from Ireland, so the stereotypes I went through are just amazing, appalling. Yes, I mean, gingerism, etc., etc. I mean, it's a poor thing. There are lots of these words that we use. You know, I heard someone recently said to someone, you know, you need to get a drink and get a wee bit of Dutch courage. And I thought, how can we be saying those things in the 21st century?
Yeah.
This is just appalling. But anyway, with more to do in language, I think.
Yeah, people don't pick it apart, do they? But language, yeah.
Language is so important to all that we do. Okay, so I just want to get rid of the power of ignorance, really. That's really what I'm trying to say. But that's not easy. It's very demanding. I mean, I haven't got this position of working all this out because it was easy. Easy is what most people do. Easy is convenient. Easy is comforting. That's not what we're about. Especially in the helping professions, we need, I mean, this is not a working sometimes in counselling and stuff. We often talk to people about what's your comfort blanket? How do you comfort yourself? We have to be careful that convenience and all of these things and doing these things is not our comfort blanket. But why is that important? Because we're going to make ourselves available physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, to be there with other people. You can't be there thinking about your own comfort. You're there to serve. Anyway, and as I say there, we've all choices to make, decisions to take. Acceptance, I love this line, I just happened to have written it, but I love it. Acceptance communicates understanding. At Kaylee's core level, her very being, she needs to feel and be understood and to experience understanding. This is as true for her as it is for me, for everyone listening or watching this, as it is for every current service user. We fundamentally come out of the womb looking for acceptance. Too many of us confuse acceptance with approval, and we're constantly seeking that from other people. So that's for another time. Okay, Picasso famously said every positive value has its price in negative terms. The genius of Einstein leads to Hiroshima or Hiroshima, whatever we like to say that. So as I try and draw this together, values is often an elusive term. It informs your choices, decision-making, judgments, actions, behavior. But if you're not explicit and you don't know what they are, then you've been driven. You're not even sure what's driving you. They tend to be very precious. If you try and address this, people will start defending and nearly attacking you because of highly prized, well defended. Usually result from primary and secondary socialization, as I demonstrated in the earlier slides at the beginning. Closely related to ethics, standards, beliefs, etc., etc. They are not neutral, and they're not. There is another myth about, you need to be sort of like objective in your practice. I never want anybody to be objective in the face of child abuse or elder abuse. You're partial towards the truth. You're partial towards protecting people. We just need to think a wee bit more. We're not scientists in that sense.
Yeah.
And they need to be readily tested, assessed, or inspected, all of these. Poorly grasped, hopefully, in terms of demonstrate this in the current profession, but life generally. Ask anybody what their values are. I mean, it's really interesting. It's a great conversational starter. Most people don't like it, and then when they really get into it, but when you hear it, you'll be thinking, gosh, it's so interesting. They're throwing everything in there, their qualities, their skills, etc. Yeah, I think I've said most of that. I mean, people can read over that. Now, here's the best for my host. Now, not reversing the interview. Now, we're going to do a couple, and then everybody else can then say, right, if any of this has made any sense, I'll see if the interviewer has been listening right now. So you test me first, and I'll tell you, and then I'll pick a couple for you.
So I just pick one out of there.
One, anyone you like.
God.
Belief. So I can say I believe in God or don't believe in God. I'm entitled to do that. It's absolutely fine. Okay, I'll give you one.
Oh, I was giving you another one.
Okay, go on.
Capitalism.
As a theory and a belief. So I might believe in capitalism, or I might believe in communism, or I might believe in socialism. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, now now, because you have compassion. I know that about you.
Okay.
A quality, belief, value, principle.
Equality.
It is a quality, absolutely. And yet it often comes up in people's notion of values, which is curious.
Yeah.
And I think I was sharing a story with you where somebody challenged me, it's about 10 years ago now, about it's definitely a value, went off to discuss it, find out about it, and come back and said, actually, I now agree it is a quality. And I said, what changed your mind? She said, I checked with the Dalai Lama. I'm telling you, who knew I'd be trumped by the Dalai Lama, but there you go. Okay, let me see. Talking.
Oh, well, talking's an act, but what else? What am I missing here? So we've got quality, belief.
You can have most of it, just etc. So it's a skill.
A skill, yeah.
Skill, that's what we do, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're writing now, so that's a skill. Let me see. Well, here are the standard ones, B-STECS, purposeful expression of feelings. Don't worry, we know it's not a value. And yet it's taught repeatedly that it's a value or a principle.
Yeah.
How is helping someone express their feelings a value or a principle? It's something that you do with people. It has value, but it's not a value. And I guarantee you, there are students now still being taught that that's a value or a principle in social work education somewhere in Britain. In fact, I don't think just somewhere, in loads of places. Okay, pick a couple more for me and then I'll move on. I think that's
okay. Poverty.
Poverty, that's a condition that people are in, and I wish they weren't. I teach stuff about poverty, and I often say, nobody ever says, a round of applause for poverty, thank you very much. I mean, poverty is an awful thing. And one of the things that really bothers me in life is when people say, I'm starving, I can't wait for my break. And I say to them, you have never been starved in a day in your life, I hope. And if you were, you would never use that phrase, or you're impoverished. So that's a condition that often we place people in. Okay, go on. NJA, sorry, for those who are watching, is non-judgmental attitude.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, what's that one then?
An attitude.
Oh, yeah. You've only put that in because people get...
No, I didn't. I just realised I had that in shorthand. I thought people would know, etc. And then, so there's loads of others. So, all right. And then my concluding observations. This is something I wrote years and years ago. It's only when I'm tested. So pressure tests all of us. It's only when I'm tested that my real assumptions, what does Gerry really assume about people, my real attitudes, my real values, principles, ethics, and behaviour are revealed. When I'm under pressure, it's not what I wish for, Kayleigh. It's not what I hope for, Kayleigh. It's not what I aspired to do or intended to do. It's, Gerry, what did you do? That's what matters.
Yeah.
And it's too late. My values and principles are not revealed by what I go and find. I come with all of those. Another myth is that when you're in social work or any helping profession, you leave yourself at your door before you walk into any or whatever, and that is absolute nonsense. And everybody knows it's nonsense. What you do is tune the stuff out that's going on for you, and you focus on Kayleigh. You focus on the person who's in front of you because you're there to serve. That's what you're paid for. Then people say to me, well, what do I do with my stuff? And I'm like, you go and get help from another helper. But the carer and service user are not there to help you. You're there to help them. And you, as a social worker, I know I'm sure gone to places, you've had a transfer of a case with someone, you're the new worker, and you've learned more about your colleague than you ever knew from the current service user because they were telling them things. And then people say, but isn't disclosure good? Now, a quick question around disclosure. It's a rhetorical one. Why do you need to tell anybody anything about yourself? And we've got to answer that question because that's something about our own need. I'm not saying certain disclosures are not okay, just saying always work out why it has to be in the interest of the service user, not you. Yeah. And then lastly, ignorance, now hopefully I've dealt with this now, is not and can never be considered a personal and professional offence. We can't say, well, I didn't know any of this. Why not? That's what I say to social workers. Now, I'm coming back out of that to get back round to the beginning, and now I'm over to you, my good host.
Okay.
I tried to put this up. So what, anything you want to ask me? Hopefully I haven't gone through that too fast. Or...
No, you haven't. It was absolutely brilliant.
You can't see me going red, so it doesn't matter.
No, it's, right. It's such a lot to take in, isn't it? Because there's so much to it. I'm just looking back to some of my original questions, but I've just been jotting down words as you've been going through it. I felt like, you know, around acceptance, like the first thing that pops into my head is Rogers. Yes. But I'm sure lots of other people talk about acceptance.
Yeah, well, Rogers talked about unconditional positive regard. You know,
yeah.
That's his key, which of course is a very sophisticated way of saying love. Interesting, as far as I understand, having read quite a lot about Rogers, etc., something I'm fond of in terms of his work, etc., and also a critic of. I have to declare both sides of. Yeah. I mean, Rogers never really felt he was loved in his life. I mean, he's written bits about that. And he struggled with acceptance, so it's really interesting, but that's one of the things he brought into the public domain about working on those things, offering, you know, unconditional positive regard, trying to convey acceptance. And in the early days of his work, lots of people were confused about what he was doing, you know. So social work, I have to say, I just want to honor Carl Rogers by saying social work owes him a debt of gratitude, as does psychiatry and psychology. I mean, he was the first, certainly in my understanding, to sit down in front of people, not sit behind them, like the more Freudian type of work, etc. He was one of the first to start recording his work so he could see his impact on people. And it's only then he realized that lots of people thought he just was disinterested. It's really interesting if you go and look at there's still videos on YouTube or whatever platform there is, you know more about that than I will, about some of Rogers' early work. It's really very fascinating. But acceptance is deeper than Rogers. Acceptance is in every religious and non-religious historical writings. Some of the greatest writers have talked about the importance of acceptance because it's what every baby strives for and wants. If a baby is able from the earliest moments and they're physically able, they will reach out with their arms, their legs, their eyes, their noise to get your attention. We all love attention, and with attention comes affirmation, but below that is acceptance, and below that again is the fear of rejection and the need for approval. And there's nothing wrong with approval. I mean, we all need approval in our lives. That's what love's about, etc., etc. But if you've never felt it and you have to keep looking for it, that places you at the mercy of other people. And that's what we need to be careful. And lots of helpers have to look at their shadow side of helping. You know, why did I come into the helping profession? I always argue the best helpers understand the price of pain. They know that pain hurts. They've dealt with their own experiences in life, and they turn their pain to gain by serving other people. There are others who have been pained and they spend their life hurting other people. And that's a difficulty, and for a bigger discussion, of course, and down the line, maybe we could look at that. Sorry, other things you want to ask?
No, that's what I was interested in. That I suppose it's just brought up a lot of things in my head that I'm now reflecting on. Like, and I think that's it. It's you brought up something about lack of time, and people say that, and I think that this just shows the importance of taking time to reflect as well, and being intentional about how you use your time. And I've been learning a lot lately about how if you don't understand yourself, you struggle to understand other people. And I think that that's something that I've developed a bit in my own practice, like trying to learn a bit about myself and some of the things and why I do things, and that it does change all the time.
Yes, well, good. The Kipling poem, it's a bit sexist, but I knew six men, their names were what, why, where, why, how, and something. And that's a very good model for analysing, evaluating, reflecting, etc. But there's also something about, I think our helping professional courses have to spend more time in helping the student understand his or herself. Now, that's a lifetime journey, but we've got to be doing that because we have to help other people understand what they're about. And if we're rather ignorant about ourselves, it's a bit of an arrogance in trying to help and stand beside others.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's something that I've really looked at properly with myself, because I think it came from a lot of, well, I enjoy listening to psychology and unpicking things anyway.
Of course, you're a social worker, you're professionally curious. No.
Yeah. That's it. But then it's a bit of a theme to my videos. I always bring up social pedagogy, but it was because I was on a postgraduate course and someone said you're a social pedagogue, and I didn't really understand what it was. But the more I learned about it, it said it's not about what you do, it's the way that you do it, and it's who you are that's important.
There's a song there, isn't there? But we'll not do it now.
Yeah, and they always use the song in the intro, the lecturers that teach this. But I think it just, I could see some of the correlations between what they were teaching me and what you were saying today.
Okay, good.
So that was
I'm hoping the model made sense, and it also speaks to who you are, because if it doesn't, then we've got to get rid of it, because it's the only thing I know that's helped me understand people in all the work I've done in education and peace and reconciliation, etc. It's helped me keep coming back to work out some stuff. I mean, in my early days working in some difficult situations in Northern Ireland, I had to work out what are the basic assumptions people are making on two sides of a divide, and try and unpack that, because that's effectively how they judged me coming forward. I mean, everybody had made assumptions about what I was doing, why I was doing, or how I was doing it, largely wrongly. But I needed to understand that before I could unpack them. And it's a bit like people who make basic assumptions about a social worker knocking the door. It's not to do with you in the first instance, but you embody it, because they may have had social work involvement before, they may know things about, etc., etc. And you know every interaction, and you're starting fresh, but it's never quite fresh, because there's expectations around that. They might be matched, they might be mixed, they might be contradictory. Lots of times I think some of the stuff that goes wrong in social work is because of that breakdown of communication, and that we think we're communicating well, but actually the filters are getting in the way. I think it was George Bernard Shaw said the illusion of communication is that it's actually happened. So hopefully we've communicated well tonight.
No, I think we have, and I feel like I just want to rewatch this and take it all in again.
Well, me too. I keep forgetting. See, I'm looking at the PowerPoint. I forget. You can obviously see me on my screen. You're a corner, so I have to remember to look at the camera. You've taught me that well.
Yeah, I think you've done that better than me because I've been reading everything. But yeah, no, I feel like there's a million things I could ask you, but I think we'll have to just do something again.
Yeah, well, and this is part of the journey we're on, and I'm really grateful for it, and the platform you provided, etc., etc. I mean, you're great, and I said that at the start, and I mean, I'm concluding with that. I mean, this has been, I'm hopeful it's come across well.
Yeah.
I don't think the model is Einsteinian. I don't think it's so way out there that people can't grasp it. I think from my humble position, hopefully not arrogance, it's pretty straightforward, and it's just packaging things in a way that people will understand, and hopefully then they can distinguish all the things like what is a quality, what's the skill, because actually the more articulate we are about this, the clearer we are, and there's no need for the miasma. The miasma is also a comfort blanket. It's like lots of stuff in helping professions. When we're unsure or we're waffling, we get into other language and etc., etc. You're thinking they actually don't know or whatever. So miasma is not, I mean, things don't just happen and sustain for years and years and years because no one's thought about this. Sometimes it's convenient, and that's not good enough.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, like just today I've had a busy, stressful day, and you just go through things and you're doing everything, but it's good to take time to just think, like, why am I doing this? Like, what am I doing? And thinking about this, it's really, really useful and essential, I think. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and efforts putting into this. And I look forward to the edited version. You might make me look all right.
Yeah, put a little filter on us. All right, I'm going to stop this now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.